this wave of emotion. Going all out, yeah, cause this is our time. No, ain't no stopping us till we reach the finish line. All in, we came here to win. We're gonna give everything. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick. On fire, we're ready to fight. We'll bring the house down tonight. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick.
Play it on the car ride, play it when you lounge. X and O, you know that we can hold it down. Shout out to my man Sammy, got it off the ground. And to all the listeners tuned in right now, got debates, analysis, and speculation. This is sports talk for the new generation. You know where to find us, got a reputation. Sick podcast, your #1 sports destination.
Giving all our devotion, riding high on this wave of emotion. Going all out, yeah, cause this is our time. No, ain't no stopping us till we reach the finish line. All in, we came here to win. We're gonna give everything. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick. On fire, we're ready to fight. We'll bring the house down tonight. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick.
S-I-C-K, it's the sickest podcast. Tune in for the audio, or you can even watch back. Giving players all the props, or put them on blast. We don't give no hot takes, only talk back. S-I-C-K,
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 S-I-C-K.
All in, we came here to win. We're gonna give everything. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick.
S-I-C-K, it's the sickest podcast. Tune in for the audio, or you can even watch back. Giving players all the props, or put them on blast. We don't give no hot takes, only talk facts.
We're giving all our devotion, riding high on this wave of emotion. Going all out, yeah, cause this is our time. No, ain't no stopping us till we reach the finish line. All in, we came here to win. We're gonna give everything. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick. On fire, we're ready to fight. We'll bring the house down tonight. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick.
Play it on the car ride, play it when you lounge. X and O, you know that we can hold it down. Shout out to my man Sammy, got it off the ground. And to all the listeners tuned in right now, got debates, analysis, and speculation. This is sports talk for the new generation. You know where to find us, got a reputation. Sick podcast, your #1 sports destination.
Giving all our devotion, riding high on this wave of emotion. Going all out, yeah, cause this is our time. No, ain't no stopping us till we reach the finish line. All in, we came here to win. We're gonna give everything. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick. On fire, we're ready to fight. We'll bring the house down tonight. S-I-C-K on the run. S-I-C-K, sick, sick.
S-I-C-K, it's the sickest podcast. Tune in for the audio, or you can even watch back. Giving players all the props, or put them on blast. We don't give no hot takes, only talk back. S-I-C-K,
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 S-I-C-K.
Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to The Sick Podcast with Tony Marinaro.
55 seconds left in the penalty, a minute and 27 seconds left in regulation time. Boston 4, Montreal 3. Lafleur coming out rather gingerly on the right side. He gives it into Lemaire, back to Lafleur.
The sickest Montreal Canadiens podcast.
You're in the ball!
Sports entertainment like no other.
Rejoint, on lui fait perdre la rondelle, une passe devant. Et c'est le dégagement et ce sera la victoire des Canadiens. Coupe Stanley pour les Canadiens. Leur 23e de l'histoire.
You found the dogs! John, you found the dogs! He found the dogs! And all together, they work the young team to the top. And now, a 24th Stanley Cup banner will hang from the rafters of the famous Forum in Montreal. The Canadians win the Stanley Cup.
Brought to you by Energy Transportation Group. Driven to be different. 8.6 beer. Intense by nature. And Locage. If the last time you went to Locage was when the Habs won the Cup, it's time you went back to Locage. It's gonna be sick.
Marinaro on this Wednesday, February 1st, and welcome to the Sick Podcast, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are live on YouTube, we're live on Facebook, and we are live on Twitter. And, of course, the Sick Podcast is brought to you in part by 8.6 beer right here, intense by nature, the beer for those who follow their instinct and live their passions just the way Pat Hickey did. We'll get to him in about a minute in order to make their mark. And brought to you by Locage. If the last time you went to Locage was when the Habs won the Cup, which is a game that I'm sure Pat Hickey covered, he'll tell us in a minute. It's time you go back to Locage. The menu will surprise you. And, of course, brought to you in part by Energy Transportation Group, a leading full-service logistics provider serving all of North America, driven to be different. Before we bring in the legendary Pat Hickey, and yes, he is a living legend. Pat's been working in the business as a journalist for over 50 years, and he's going to tell us everywhere he had a chance to work once again shortly. But yesterday he sent out this email to everyone at the Montreal Gazette. I'm taking this opportunity to inform you that I will be taking voluntary retirement. This is not the way I envisioned the end of my newspaper career. I thought I might have exited in the same manner as Grant Wall, slumping over my computer after finishing an NNA-worthy story, but I hope my departure will provide at least a temporary reprise for someone younger and more talented. Newspapers have been described as the daily miracle, and it has been somewhat miraculous that we have been able to produce a high-quality product through an actual pandemic, and a pandemic created by corporate types who have never sweated through a deadline, written a headline, or have had to deal with folks who believe all the problems of the world are created by the media. It will be no less miraculous with the latest belt tightening, although I am certain that there won't be any missed bonuses in the boardroom. I have worked for 6 newspapers across this country, starting with the Montreal Star in 1965. I made stops at the Gazette, Toronto Sun, the Globe and Mail, Toronto Star, and Vancouver Sun, with multiple stops at 3 of those papers. Life lesson number 1, never burn your bridges. I've covered stories on 4 continents and find it sad that the Gazette couldn't afford to cover a hockey game last weekend in Ottawa. I'm proud of all we've accomplished at the Gazette, particularly in recent years. I valued the time during the pandemic when I left the toy department and worked as a general news reporter. I joke about being on the demonstration beat, but on 10 consecutive Saturdays, I covered a total of 11 demonstrations, ranging from tenants upset with their landlords in Mile End to women whose partners were trapped outside Canada by immigration, red tape, to the granddaddy of all protests, which saw thousands of anti-maskers, anti-vaxxers, QAnon, Trump supporters, patriots, and Robert Charlebois, and the Raelians, a great name for rock groups, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and every other disaffected group through Montreal. I wish all my colleagues, past and present, well, for those who survive the latest purge, keep up the excellent work for as long as it lasts. For those who are departing, I hope you find satisfaction in whatever you do in the future. P. Valentine Hickey. Pat Hickey, how are you?
I'm fine, Tony.
It's nice to see you, Pat.
It's good to see you.
I know your career's not over yet. You got 5 weeks to go, but Allow me to join everyone in saying what a great career you've had, Pat, even though it's not over yet.
Well, thank you, Tony. I'm very proud of what I've done over the years. I think I've tried to work hard. I've tried to be honest. I've tried to be, informative. Try to tell stories. I mean, that's the important thing. I've always seen myself as a storyteller. That's part of what journalism is: telling stories and communicating with people, and that's what I've tried to do.
Pat, even though you and I have, worked in the communications, but in different forms, you in print journalism and myself for the most part in radio, I always saw you as a little bit of a mentor, even though we weren't doing exactly the same thing, but we were. Reason being, I said a lot of stupid things, and every time I did, you put me in my place right away, and you made sure you told me about it. And I think I've done less stupid things over the last couple of years. I did a lot more at the beginning, a young member of the media trying to find my way. Sometimes you do a little bit too much. And when I crossed the line, you would tell me. And, it's funny because sometimes you would tell me and my bosses wouldn't even tell me. And just know, Pat, that I appreciate that.
Well, one of the things I've always tried to do, Tony, is I've always tried to work with younger reporters and try to do the same thing that at the beginning of my career, I got advice and help from Red Fisher and Ian McDonald. And I tried to do the same thing for young reporters. I pride myself on some of the people that I've hired over the years, who have done very well in this business. And I've always tried to do, help with people who may not, who in essence are competitors. And because I think it's important for people to do the right things and approach it in the right way. And I like to think that I've helped some people along the way and tried to make them better journalists. And so that's what I've always tried to do.
Pat, walking away so that you can save a younger journalist's job, man, that's one of the most noble things and one of the most honorable things I think I've ever seen anyone do, because it's not everyone who would do it. Geez, I'm not going to lie to you. I don't know if I'd be able to do that if I got to that point. But let me ask you this, Pat. How much more did you have in you?
Oh, I think I had a lot more. I think I still have a lot more, and I'm probably not going to do it in this business, but I think I'm still going to be able to contribute in some way. I'm not sure exactly what it's going to be yet. I think there's a book that I want to write. I think that I may end up doing some teaching, and trying to do some of the same things. I always told people, people would say, why aren't you retired? And I'm going to be 79 in April, and I still have a lot of energy. I always said I'll keep doing this as long as it's fun. I mean, people are paying me, an obscene amount of money for going to sports events, and I would have continued doing it if this situation had not arisen. And I was on a Zoom call after they announced the cuts. Originally, Postmedia announced they were going to cut 11% across the country. And that would have meant 3, maybe 4 people at the Gazette. And I thought, well, there's probably some people that want out, and we'll be able to do that. But then they announced that there were going to be 10 cuts in Montreal, which is 25% of the workforce of the newsroom. And we were on a Zoom the next day, and there were probably 25 people on there. And you could see people who were visibly upset, the younger people. These are people with, children, mortgages. And, it would have been a major blow to them to, lose their jobs. And it's always the younger people, who get the short end of the stick. So I thought at that point, I mean, my conscience told me that I had to go. And so I can do something else. I don't need a lot of money. I'm in a good position, and so it was time.
You worked with Stu Cowan for how long?
I worked with Stu since '87, I guess, when I came back to Montreal.
Wow, let's bring him on right now. Stu Cowan from the Montreal Gazette. Welcome, Stu. What can you tell us about this gentleman that we haven't heard already?
Well, Pat and I go a long way back. Pat remembers me when I had hair. That's how far back we go. As what Pat's done, we don't know who's going to be laid off at the Gazette. We don't know who the people are going to be gone, but one last person is going to be gone because of Pat and what he's done. And anybody who knows Pat isn't surprised because the man's heart, he's got a heart of gold. Everybody knows that. I know that. I spend more time with Pat during the hockey season than I spend with my wife or kids, probably. And, we've traveled together. We sit next to each other in the press box. And anybody who knows Pat, the first thing that, apart from the great journalist he is and the great guy he is, he's got a heart of gold. And this is the latest example of that. And I'm really fortunate. I'm one of the most lucky guys in Montreal sports media because Pat talked about the people that he hired, and I'm sure he'll go into this later in the podcast. He made a lot of incredible hirings. He didn't hire me. It was Red Fisher who was sports editor at the Gazette when he hired me. But I was a young guy in the business, and my three mentors were Red Fisher, Pat Hickey, and Michael Farber.
Not too shabby.
Doesn't get any better than that.
Three Hall of Famers.
That's three Hall of Famers right there. So I've learned so much from all three of them. Three different personalities, three different styles of writers, but three great professionals, three great men, and three guys who did the job right. And I was a sponge. I just soaked it up and learned so much from all three of those guys. And I wouldn't be sitting here now if it wasn't for the help of, first for Red for hiring me, and then from what I learned from Pat, both working as an editor on the news desk. Pat was sports editor at a time. He was my boss, and later I was sports editor and I was his boss. But just learning how to be an editor, how to be a writer, how to be a columnist, and how to be a good person.
Pat, you said a couple of minutes ago that you still have a lot to do and you'll probably be doing it. And, you'll probably be doing other stuff. But you also said that you love doing what you do and you love writing. So my question to you is, have you thought about writing for somebody else or in some other way, shape, or form? Or
there really, unfortunately, there isn't, there aren't any outlets out there. Everybody's contracting. There's fewer jobs. I know that when the Athletics started, for example, I think that there were a lot of people in the newspaper business who felt threatened by it. I thought it was a good thing because it meant there were more jobs, there were more opportunities for people to express themselves, and there were going to be people that were being forced out at other places, that was suddenly had an outlet to write. I suppose I could start the sickest podcast or the terminally ill podcast, but that's not me, So as I say, I think people have been urging me for years to write a book. I'm not sure there are enough people that are dead yet that I can, be totally honest in it. But anybody who knows me knows I have a lot of stories.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stories that haven't been told, and there are a lot of stories that deserve retelling.
Yeah.
And
Pat, besides the book, if you want to write more, I know a podcast that I can think of that you can write for the podcast. You make your own hours. You write an article a week if you want, or you write 2 articles a week, or you write an article every second week. You pick the sport. If it's the Habs, great. If it's something else, I know a podcast that you can write for, Pat.
Do you? Okay. Do I get paid in beer or character?
Pat, I moved over to a podcast and I'm making more money now than I ever did. So no, you'll get paid and you'll get direct deposit every couple of weeks, Pat.
Yeah. Well, it's a possibility. I mean, it's something to think about, Tony. And it's just, but I'm just saying I'm going to do something. I might teach.
What do you want to teach, Pat?
I would teach. I would be a supply teacher. A substitute teacher.
Mm-hmm. I was hoping you would teach English. I would take a class.
I
still haven't figured it out 50
Well,
years
Tony,
later.
Pat's got at least 2 books that he has to write. One is the Pat Hickey story. Anybody who's ever been fortunate enough in the media to say, well, it used to be Red Fisher's table in the media room, and it's become Pat's table, and I'm sure Red loves that. Red and Pat were great friends and had great mutual respect, but Pat's got a million stories.
A million stories. Pat, who's your
and before I heard one the other day
who's my what?
I think Stu was cutting up. Stu, if you could you were cutting up for a second there. We just missed the last couple of seconds. Go ahead.
Okay, so I was saying that he's got at least two books he can write.
Yeah.
All the stories that he shares when he's sitting at the media table in the lounge. And I heard one the other day I had never heard before from colleague John Mahoney. Pat's brilliant. I don't know how many people know just how smart this guy is. When we used to work on the sports desk at 7 o'clock or whatever time Jeopardy would come on, this is back when we had like 4 or 5 editors every night on the sports desk.
Yeah.
All work would stop while Pat Hickey and Paul Carberry, used to be an editor at the Gazette, would watch Jeopardy and make the rest of us all feel like we're dummies. Like they would be firing out the answers as soon as they were coming out, and we just sit there and go, "Oh my God, how stupid am I?" Or it wasn't a case of how stupid am I; it's how smart these guys were. So Pat, he's got a million stories to share, and he's also he'll tell you, I've told Pat this for years. He needs to write an NHL travel book. You know, when I started traveling with the Canadiens and I moved from sports editor to columnist about 7 years ago, I started going on the road. I went to these NHL cities I'd never been to before.
Yeah.
So the first call I always made was, Pat, what hotel should I stay at? Pat, what restaurant should I go to? And Pat, where should I go for beer after the game? And he never steered me wrong in any place I've ever been. And it's not the touristy place that everybody knows. Pat knows all the best places in all the cities in the NHL. And, you know, back when the Canadiens made the playoffs 6 or 7 years ago in New York, and Pat's from New York, he knows the city like the back of his hand.
Yeah.
We traveled together. We roomed together down there. We were together 24/7. And he showed me New York, the cool spots, the spots that only a real New Yorker would know. And later that year, that summer, my daughter at the time was about 17, 18, and I took her to New York City. And I earned major cool dad points because I knew my way around New York City. And my daughter was like, "How do you know where all these places are?" Pat Hickey. So Pat's got to write at least 2 books, one on his life story. There's a million stories, and they're fantastic, and one an NHL travel book. And I think where I cut off, John Mahoney, the photographer at the Gazette, showing just how Pat's mind works. He talked this story. I think they were in Carolina. There was about 12 guys went out for dinner, French guys, English guys in the media. The bill came. Pat opened the bill. He glanced at it, closed it, and said, "Okay, it's $82.50 each, and that includes a tip." And John Mahoney went and had a calculator, and he did it, and bang on, right to the penny. So he's Pat, apart from being a great guy and a great storyteller, he's got a brilliant mind.
Pat, where did you grow up exactly? Where were you raised? When did you come to Canada?
I grew up in New York. I was born in Queens, lived in Brooklyn until I was 5 or 6, moved out to Long Island, went to high school in Manhattan for a couple of years.
My dad's best friend lives in Long Island.
Yeah.
Farmingdale.
And then I came to Canada in 1962 to go to university in Halifax, St. Mary's University. I was there for 3 years. I was going to work for the Halifax Chronicle Herald, Mail Star, and I came to visit some friends in Montreal. And I basically dropped out of school. I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to work in a newspaper. And I came to Montreal, and there was a guy named George Hansen who worked at the Montreal Star, and he had worked in Halifax before, so I knew him.
Mm-hmm.
I ran into him, and he said there's an opening at the Montreal Star, and I went down and interviewed it. And they said, "No, you know, we need someone more experienced. You know, your clips are good, but you know, stuff from college newspapers and a couple of freelance stuff from the Halifax Chronicle Herald." And but then I fell in love with Montreal, and I got a job working for Allied Chemical. And the day I was supposed to start working for them, the Montreal Star called me up and said, "We're going to give you a trial." And so I had to call up Allied Chemical and say, "You know, I'm supposed to start work today, but I won't be in."
Wow, that's great.
And then I found out later that this LA Chemical was going to pay me $40 a week more than the Montreal Star was. But I worked for them. As I said, Red was my mentor, Ian McDonald. Red taught me how to be a newspaper man, and Ian taught me how to fill out an expense account.
Well,
Mac was another mentor for me too. When I talked about how fortunate I was when I got in the business, but
he's a great guy.
Right, Pat, you got to tell the story about how there was a time you were working, I think, 2 jobs and going to university and playing for the university basketball team all at the same time. Well,
no, there was a period of 2 years where I worked 2 jobs. I worked at the CBC and I worked at the Montreal Star. In fact, for those 2 years, I made more money at the CBC than I did at the Montreal Star.
Wow.
But then after that, I left my CBC job and I worked full time, and I went to school full time at Sir George Williams, finished my degree, and I also played basketball at Sir George. So, and I had 2 kids at the time too. So
wow.
It was a question of time management.
Well, the biggest lesson, Tony, the biggest lesson I probably learned from Pat among the many, many lessons I learned is work ethic. Nobody works harder than Pat Hickey. I remember when I was sports editor, and Pat, I think it was a Canadians practice he covered in the morning, and it was a Saturday. So I was at home, I was off, and Pat calls me and he says, oh, I'm looking at the paper. I see the GMIA football, high school football finals this afternoon at Molson Stadium. Is anybody covering it? And I said, no, nobody's covering it, but we have a photographer there and somebody's going to call in the score and we'll get something. And he says, well, I'll go cover it. I said, Pat, it's 20 below zero outside. It was a cold, like November day or whatever. It was freezing. I said, Pat, don't worry. You got the hockey. No. So Pat went after going to the practice, he went to Molson Stadium, covered the high school football final in freezing temperatures, went to the Bell Center. I imagine you wrote the story at the Bell Center, Pat, and then covered the hockey game that night. And that's just as a sports editor, Pat was a dream because he would cover everything and anything and never complain about it.
But Stu, that's not only about work ethic, but you're right. It's a big part of it. It's also about loving what you do.
That's true. Yeah.
Right.
True. And Pat had a love for sports, whether it was covering the Canadians, covering the high school football final, covering the cycling on Mount Royal, covering the tennis, which I know is a real passion for Pat. But whatever he covered, he went into it 100%. It wasn't like haphazardly do this or whatever. He put 100% into everything he ever wrote, and that's a big lesson that I learned from Pat. And you look at the stuff he's covered over the years; it's remarkable. I mean, there's not a sport he didn't cover. And he said, during COVID, he was covering. He was working as a reporter on the news desk. I was working as an editor on the news desk. He was covering, all kinds of different stuff that and never complained once about it. Just went and did his job and was happy to do it.
Pat, I would obviously never ask you how much money you're making right now, but the curiosity is killing me. Your first job writing, can you tell us or you remember how much you paid?
$65 a week.
$65 a week. That was
back draft then? Beer was what, 10 cents then, Pat?
That beer was 10 cents. That's right.
10 cents. Wow. Okay.
A pint was 35 cents, and a quart was 70 cents.
Wow. So that was what year exactly? And
that was 1965.
So $65 a week in 1965 was considered good money, average money. What was it considered?
No, it was not considered good money at all. It was
really.
I mean, after 3 months, I got a bump to $92.
Okay,
and then
that's good.
I went to the Gazette in '67. They offered me the Alouettes beat, and I think I was covering university football and filling in with some junior hockey and occasional Canadians practices but they offered me a Canadians, the Alouettes beat, and I got bumped to $130.
Wow!
And then when the Union came in a little later, I went back to the Star when Red became the sports editor. That was the deal. I asked him whether I should go to the Gazette, and he said, "Yeah, it's a great opportunity to get a beat and make a little more money." And then when when he became the sports editor, he called me up one day. He said, "You got to put in your notice because you're coming back here."
Wow. Hey, Pat, were you in Montreal when the Canadians won 6 cups in the 70s, 71, 73, 76, 77, 78, 79?
I was there till 75. I went to. I was a sports editor, and I was named sports editor in 74, and I lasted about a year.
That was at the Star, Pat?
At the Star, yes. And I lasted. The reason why I left was the Olympics were coming, and I was management, and the union said I couldn't write. So I figured, here's the biggest sports event I'm ever going to see in my life, and I'm not going to be able to write it. I'm going to be sitting in an office, and the Toronto Sun offered me an opportunity to cover the Olympics, go to Toronto. My wife at the time was an actress. It was a better move for her, and so we moved. We moved in 75.
So you were in Montreal until 75 before coming back. When you were in Montreal until 75, were you writing sports?
I was writing sports, yes.
Wow.
But the last year I wasn't because I was the sports editor.
You covered that amazing 71 Cup win then.
I did cover that, yes. I didn't cover it as the main guy. Red did.
Yeah.
I did sidebars and things like that.
A lot of Hall of Famers on that team, eh?
I did the first 2 games of the Summit Series.
Oh, wow. All right. So is that out of every sporting event you've written about, is that one way up there, the Summit Series, or was there another event that was your favorite?
It was okay. It was, they lost the first game, which was a bit of a downer, and they came back to win the second game in Toronto. I covered the New Year's Eve game for the Toronto Sun, and I would disagree with all the people who say it was the greatest game ever. I thought it was a pretty bad game. And Dryden was terrible. The
3-3 game. Dryden was terrible, and Tretiak was pretty good.
Tretiak was good, and the rest of the players were sort of, it was a good game, but it certainly wasn't the greatest game ever played.
It's funny you say that, Pat, because I've watched them over and over, and I always thought the same thing. It was a good game, but it was nowhere close to like 79, the Canadians and the Bruins game 7, right? Nowhere close.
Yeah. That New Year's Eve game got better as the years went on, right, Pat?
I think that's right. My friend Todd Deneau wrote a book about it, called The Greatest Game Ever. And, as I say, it was a good game. It was, coming on the heels of the Summit Series. There was a lot of excitement, Russia, Canada. But it was not, it wasn't the greatest game ever. The highlight of my career was I covered John Beliveau's 500th goal.
Wow.
Which is a big thing because Red normally would have covered that game. He was tied up with TV or radio that night, and he said, "You're going to do the game." And then when Beliveau scored the 500th goal, he had a hat trick, and nobody expected that. I said to Red, I said, "You want to do the game story?" He said, "No, it's all yours, kid." And, I ended up on the front page. I ended up on the front page a couple of times. 93 when they won the cup, the last
Pretty
cup.
Pretty cool.
I ended up on the front page when 2 bombings, one in Atlanta. I was a block away from when the bomb went off during the Olympics.
Wow.
And another time I was in London when the IRA lobbed the bomb into the Prime Minister's backyard. And I wrote a story on that, which ended up on the front page. And
well, so the article, and by the way, I'll get to this in a second. We're talking about great hockey games. I don't know about you gentlemen, but for me, and keep in mind though, right? I was born in 72, so I really started remembering hockey probably started in the 80s, but my first recollection was the Lafleur goal in 79. I really remember that. I really do, because there was a huge scream in the house. My dad was pretty excited. And there was my love for Guy Lafleur was born. But the best hockey guys I ever watched was the 87 Canada Cup. The three games, Canada versus USSR, Gretzky and Lemieux. What do you think?
That was amazing hockey. That was
It was amazing hockey. Yes.
The talent on both of those teams was incredible, especially on the Canadian team. That was amazing hockey. I'm old enough to remember. I mean, I'm younger than Pat, but I remember Paul Henderson's goal in the '72 Summit Series in Game 8. I was 9 at the time, so I was in grade 4 or whatever it was. I remember watching it in school, like so many other kids that age did. So that's a game that stays in my memory, probably the same way the '87 game does with you, Tony.
Yeah, I watched it in school. I was back at Sir George Williams for that game, and the prof was smart enough to cancel the classes that afternoon.
Yeah.
And I watched the first 2 periods in a hallway at Sir George Williams on a black and white screen, and then I went across to the Fife and Drum, which is across the street from Sir George Williams, and watched the 3rd period there. And of course, everybody went crazy when Henderson scored the goal. And the whole city went crazy. I mean, I don't think there were too many people that weren't watching the game that afternoon.
Pat, some great stories, and I think we're going to get to a couple more in a second. But I have to ask you: are you worried about the business?
Sure. I mean, you'd be crazy not to worry about the business. You look at advertising revenues are going down. I think that with these layoffs, the quality at the Gazette, I can't say enough about all the hardworking people there who work to create an outstanding product every day, and it's just going to be more and more difficult for them to do that as time goes on, and you don't know whether there's going to be more layoffs. It's sad to see all the talented people who put the effort and time in that they do. But I mean, the reality is that we've lost our advertising base. Stu can remember the days when we had a lot of automobile dealers advertising. In fact, it was
part of our advertising department only dealt with automobiles. We had a section that only sold automobiles.
Of that, and we every year they would have a golf tournament to thank all these car dealers for doing business with us. But that's gone now. Everybody goes to Auto Trader if they want something.
Yeah, I hear you.
Millions of dollars in advertising.
GG. There's no more entertainment movie advertising. Again, that's all online, you're depending upon people buying the product, but yet at the same time you're probably giving them less product in return, and that's the size of the paper is shrinking every month, and we try to get as much stuff out there online as we can, and but not everybody is attuned to that.
And a lot of people.
Son's 29 years old. I don't think he's ever read a newspaper.
Yeah,
and then there's a lot of people in his generation that are like that. And it's not that he doesn't get news; he just doesn't get it from a newspaper, either online or an actual newspaper.
Well, I remember speaking to some journalism classes and asking how many of you get the paper at home or read the paper at home, and like maybe 5 kids would put up their hands, and I said, how many of you 5 kids live at home with your parents? And the same hands would go up.
Yeah.
So the younger generation, I'm in a lot of airports. Pat, you're in a lot of airports, or at least we used to be during the Canadian season. And like you'd see somebody reading a newspaper, you'd almost stop in your tracks. But people are consuming more news than ever. Everybody's reading on their phones or reading on their computer or reading on whatever. The problem now is, as Pat said, we have a lot more on the Gazette website than we have in the paper. A lot of older people don't want to make the switch, but that switch is going to come whether they like it or not just with the Gazette. The print product everywhere is in danger. And the problem online is people don't want, once you put up a paywall, people don't want to pay for anything, right? People don't want to, for whatever reason, don't want to pay whatever the fee is for the news, and it makes it difficult. And then for advertising online, Google and Facebook and those giants suck up so much of online ad revenue. So it's not just the Gazette. It's any, whether it's Sports Illustrated, whether it's any publication. It's difficult times, and especially in the newspaper business. It's
funny.
In our situation, I mean, you want people to buy it, but there's probably 35 to 40% of people who don't care about sports.
Yeah.
So, you know, and you get people who, you know, care about sports. They'll put the money into the Athletic or some other product.
Yeah.
The thing is, I remember getting a smartphone. The first time I got a smartphone, however many years ago, I'm thinking, I'm never going to read anything on a phone.
Yeah.
But now I read, I'm probably like you, Tony, also. I read almost everything on my phone now.
Yeah, I hear you.
It's but just the way, but I grew up every morning. I had my bowl of cereals, my Captain Crunch or whatever it was, with the Gazette scoreboard page.
Yeah.
And studying all the stats. And my first job in the Gazette sports section was doing the scoreboard page. And on a Sunday, it was 2 full pages, with, you know, because we didn't publish on Sunday. And so Sunday for Monday was a 12-hour shift. And that's how I got in. I mean, that page was gone for a long time. It's just Pat mentioned the car advertising. Classified was the first thing to sort of leave the newspaper business. Yeah. The old Saturday Gazette would have 3 sections of classified ads. So it's times have changed, and the newspaper business has tried to change along with it, and it hasn't been easy. I mean,
classified ads, right? The ticket brokers and stuff like that. People that were scalping tickets or selling.
Selling anything, selling your house, selling your car, selling your old couch, selling whatever, and then
and Stu and Pat, we're so dependent so much more on newspapers in the past. You remember, like I'm a big fan of hockey pools and fantasy and stuff like that. Right? We used to wake up the next day and go to the Montreal Gazette newspaper to take a look at the box scores and who picked up a goal and who picked up an assist. And you remember the whole drill, right? We take a loose leaf and we take a pencil and we start writing down the amount of points our players picked up, and we would add it all up ourselves. And you talked about a paywall, and I'm going to tell you something, and I have nothing against any publication or anyone that sets up a paywall for their work. But when we met with Agnello and Sammy a couple of years ago, and they told me that they wanted to start up the Sick podcast, I asked them about setting up a paywall and Patreon and stuff, and they didn't want to know nothing. They wanted it to be free content for everyone, and they said no. And I said, how are you going to raise? How are you going to create revenue? And they said, well, we'll have a free product. We're going to try and make it a great product. And it's going to get a lot of views, and it's going to get a lot of engagement, a lot of impressions, and it's going to make a lot of noise, and it's going to reach a lot of homes. And at that point, advertisers are going to jump on board, and they're going to pay for the advertising, and that's the way we're going to do it. But they wanted it to be free content for everyone. And I look back on their decision today, and once again, I have nothing against those who set one up, but I think it was a good decision to offer free content, because one of the things I'm noticing is that people they don't have a habit of paying for too many of these podcasts or too many of these papers or services anymore, right?
That's right. That's right. But there's also, for real journalism, it costs money to pay real journalists, right? And
right.
It's we're going to be down to about 30 people in the Gazette, and Pat, you and I remember the days, and you go back further than me. There was hundreds. When I was first name sports editor, we had a full-time secretary for sports. We had, I think there was 8 reporters probably at the time, just sports, and there was like 5 or 6 editors who were just sports. And then as time went on, the secretary was the first to go, and then there was more and more and more, and now we're at the point we are now. And it's, as I said, it's not just the Gazette; it's the newspaper business in general, in many ways. And it's these are difficult times for anybody in this business. And again, just to applaud Pat for what he did to he saved somebody's job. We don't know whose job that is yet. We'll find out. It could have been mine. I mean, I figure I'm okay with the seniority I have, but you never we don't happening. I mean, there's people with less seniority than me. So, but somebody is going to have a job in 5 weeks that wouldn't have had a job if it wasn't for Pat doing what he did.
Pat, a couple of minutes ago, you talked about in the newspaper, there were so many ads from car dealerships. Speaking of cars, we have to talk about you traveling on the road from city to city in your car, of course. So a lot of people heard about it, don't quite understand why you did it. Did he love to drive? Was he afraid of planes? Did he think the travel was easier driving? Or was it because he was paid by kilometer? Or was it all of the above? Which one was it, Pat?
Well, first of all, I'm not afraid of planes. I enjoy flying. I don't like airports and I don't like airlines. I figured the last year that we had a full season and traveled, I computed that I lost more than 100 hours in flight delays and cancellations. And I remember one time I was flying from Winnipeg to Minneapolis, 1 hour flight. Got to the airport 7 o'clock in the morning. The airport was closed. There was a storm, and so they closed the airport. And then we finally got on a plane at noon, and we couldn't move because the brakes had frozen.
Wow.
We're in Winnipeg. If you don't understand this cold weather there, and you can't keep the brakes from freezing, you got a problem. And we eventually left at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and got to Minneapolis. You know, I got there just in time for the national anthem. J.F. Chaumont got a cab, and he was a few minutes behind me, but the cab's transmission quit about 4 blocks from the arena, and then he had a fight with the driver whether he was going to have to pay or not, and then the driver wouldn't open the trunk to get his
bag out,
and now he's got to drag a roller bag through 4 blocks of snow. You know, they're just not built for that. And he showed up halfway through the first period. The RDS crew had to deal with the carnets at customs, and they didn't get there till halfway through the second period. I had the same season. I had a flight from St. Louis to Montreal with a stopover in LaGuardia. And I get to LaGuardia around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I find out that my flight to Montreal has been canceled. But I've been rebooked. I'm at LaGuardia, and I've been rebooked at JFK at 7 o'clock the next morning. So I go to American Airlines, and I say, you know, look, I don't really know much about New York. I'm an old guy. I need some advice here. So, well, we're going to put you up at the LaGuardia Hilton and LaGuardia Holiday Inn. And I said, but isn't JFK on the other side of the island? You know, it's distance. And she said, yeah. And I said, well, can you get something closer to JFK? So they said, okay. You know, I did some fooling around. They said, we can get you into the JFK Hilton. I said, that'd be fine. And we'll get you a limo to take you there, get your luggage. So I get my luggage. I get in the limo. I go to JFK Hilton, get there around 4 o'clock. I drop my bags off in the hotel room. I grab the shuttle to the airport. I take the air train into Jamaica. I take the Long Island Railroad into Manhattan. I have dinner in Manhattan. I see Ethan Hawke in American Buffalo on Broadway. I get back in time. I have a $50 voucher for food, and I get back to the Hilton in time to spend the $50 at the bar. And I wake up the next morning at 5:30 and take my flight back to Montreal.
I used to wonder, Tony. I used to wonder why Pat drove. I did why did you drive to Boston? Then you remember telling me, well, I can drive to Boston quicker than I can fly. And when you factor in the time, especially now that you have to be at the airport early, and by the time you get through customs, and by the time you do everything else, and he's right. And from the traveling I've done since then, over the last 6-7 years, and especially this season, I think in November, December, I think it was in 9 or 10 different NHL cities. However many flights, it's more than 10 with some connecting flights, say 15 flights. The only flight I was on that actually left and landed on time was the one that got me home on Christmas Eve, which I'm thankful for because I was sure I wasn't going to make it home. But from Dallas, they played in Dallas, I think on the 23rd. So I understand that Pat talks about sitting around waiting in airports. I haven't done it as long as he has. And it's there's so much about the jobs that we have that are fantastic. And people say, oh, you get to travel. It's wonderful. It's wonderful once you get there.
Yeah.
There sometimes can be a real
Don't worry, Stu. Christmas Eve flights are great because the pilot wants to get to where
that's true too.
On time.
But as Pat's told me, like if he gets in his car at 8 in the morning or whatever going to Boston, he knows what time he's going to get to Boston, you know, give or take maybe an hour depending on traffic, but you know you're going to get there. And then once you get there, you also have your own car, so you're mobile.
Yeah, but you know, this is what I think it's pretty cool, Pat, because The difference being, though, is that, Stu, you could relax in a plane. When you're in a car, obviously you have to have your full attention because you're driving. I'm not one who drives well. Like I can't do more than a trip to Boston. Like more than that, like if I had to go to Toronto, I'd have to stop. I can't drive more than 5 hours. I just
Pat loves to drive too. I know that.
Yeah.
I mean, when the Canes
I find driving relaxing. I put on NPR. I put on ESPN radio. I find it relaxing. And as I said, I can stop somewhere if I want to stop and pick up some groceries on the way back. If I want to stop and do some shopping. If I want to stop and visit friends, it's all possible.
Did you ever have any nightmares driving? Like, is there anything bad that ever happened while you were driving? Did you ever get into an accident or anything? Or
not while I was? No. Well, actually, I had my car break down in New Jersey. Arpon Basu was with me, and I'm trying to think of who else, and ended up. I forget what it was. I think it was a Nissan. It was a Honda or something like that. But the engine I had was a Japanese engine, and they couldn't find I had to leave the car there.
Oh wow!
And they did a great job of fixing it. I picked it up 2 days later.
Wow!
And so we ended up renting a car and going from there. But and one time I had a flat tire. I think my Arpon might have been in my car that time.
Arpon's bad luck.
He's bad luck. He's bad luck. You're right.
Pat, the best.
I had the incident in Philly where the car was vandalized.
That's the best. That's the best one. When his car got vandalized in Philly, I remember I was sports editor at the time, and I show up in the office and I have my flashing light from my phone, and all the messages are like from the NBC affiliate in Philadelphia and this radio station in Philadelphia and whatever else, and they all want to talk to Pat. And I'm like, what the hell's? And then I found out his car got vandalized by a bunch of Flyers fans.
Oh, really? Wow.
I mean, one other thing, they stole my license plate.
Yeah.
So it was interesting coming back home. I got stopped 3 times on the way back. People wanting to know, don't you know you don't have a license plate in the back?
Wow.
I said, yes, I know. And I showed them the police report, and that's on my way.
Pat, I so appreciate your time. I know it's getting a little bit late. I don't know if you got 5 more minutes for me because there's just a couple of more questions that I top. The athlete that you most enjoyed covering?
Jean Beliveau.
That's a great choice, obviously.
I mean,
the athlete that just you found wasn't pleasant to talk to, more so than any other athlete.
Well, I'd say it's a toss-up between Danny Ainge and Andrei Markov.
Markov, really, eh? He was a few words. He was a few words, but
he was just a very strange guy. It was like a chore for him to do an interview.
Yeah, he didn't like it.
Yeah,
I remember when I was going there as a reporter and hanging out and on game days or whatever and interviewing members of the opposition. Keith Tkachuk was difficult. I think I was almost scarred by him. Like he was difficult, and John Tortorella was a great quote, but sometimes he would just lose it over very little, and it made the whole thing very uncomfortable. It's kind of like just got the feeling that he just wanted to end it in a hurry.
Yeah, I mean the wrong question could set Torts off. Yeah. I never had any problems with him. So
yeah.
Well, we're fortunate now, Tony, with dealing with Marty St. Louis. And for people who didn't see what Marty said last night about Pat at the end of the news conference, it was classy, it was touching, it was really showed the man that Marty is. And they offered Pat the last question at the end of the press conference, and the questions have basically all been answered already. Pat didn't have a question, and Marty just he had heard why Pat was leaving and talked about the respect he had for him for the decision he made, and it was a real special moment in the news conference room last night.
And let's bring up a picture if we can here. Let's bring up a picture. Look at that, huh? Pretty cool, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Pat,
class acts right there.
Pat, he's I think he said something to you like, you got 5 more weeks and you can ask all the questions you want,
right,
I think you told him you're getting pretty emotional. How emotional was it for you, Pat?
It was pretty emotional. I mean, earlier in the day, I think I got an email from almost every one of my colleagues at the Gazette and some former colleagues. A woman named Catherine Wallace, who I gave her first job to, and she ended up as my boss at the Gazette.
Yeah.
And, reading some of those, I mean, I teared up. And then, when Marty came down and shook my hand, and I said, I think I'm going to cry.
Yeah. Wow.
I was really, it was a very emotional day.
Mm-hmm. So we talked about your travel habits. Your favorite city besides New York, where you were born and raised, was or is?
I mean, New York is one of my favorites.
I know Stu loves Nashville.
Yeah,
I love Nashville too.
Everybody loves Nashville.
I love the two Florida cities. I mean, there aren't too many places in the NHL that I don't like. I mean, there's some places that are so impersonal. LA, Anaheim. I do like San Jose. Stu and I both have some favorite places there.
Yeah.
Speaking of Pat writing a travel book, the little hotel in San Jose that he told me to stay at when I was booking through the travel agent, they had never heard of it before. And then when they found it, they went, "Oh my God, that's a good rate." And it's like a block away from the hotel. It's
shout out.
There's lots of interesting places. I mean, one time in San Jose, I stayed in Gilroy, which is about 15 kilometers away, and it's the garlic capital of California, of the United States.
Uh-huh.
And I stayed at the Holiday Inn Express, and they have a happy hour at night. And normally you get Bud Light, and some Plonk. But this time, because you're in wine country, they had 3 or 4 really good bottles of wine, and they had some craft beers, including New Belgium, which makes Fat Tire beer, which is a very good craft beer. But they had Ben and Jerry's chocolate chip cookie dough ice cream beer. Wow. And I said, I have to try that. And the guy said, yeah, everybody does, but I'm just going to give you a couple of ounces. And it was as terrible as it sounds.
Well, I could imagine. A quick shout out to matrixhomefitness.ca. Discover a club quality workout in the comfort of your own home. Bring home those treadmills, the elliptical, the bike, the rowers, you name it. Visit matrixhomefitness.ca. Pat, the Montreal Canadiens coach that you thought you had the best working relationship with.
I think I had a really good relationship with Claude Julien. I had a really good relationship with Pat Burns after he was coaching. We both lived in the Eastern Townships. We spent some time together. We also spent some time together with Bob Berry, who lived in the same area during the summers.
Yeah.
And who I knew from playing at St. George Williams back in the 60s. So, we would spend some time together in the summer. I had a pretty good relationship with Alain Vigneault. I had a good relationship with Michel Therrien the second time around. The first time was not
difficult?
very good.
So was that the most difficult out of all your relationships with a former Montreal Canadiens coach in terms of just connecting with the coach after the games, asking questions? Was it with Michel Therrien 1.0, or was there another coach that you had a hard time
I think
with?
it was probably Michel Therrien 1.0. Trying to think of who else was in there. Of course, I had a great relationship with Jacques Demers.
Yeah.
Jacques Demers wrote the introduction for one of my books, and we had a really good relationship. It's funny. I remember when he was in Tampa Bay after he left Montreal, and we went out to lunch one day, and he said, for various reasons, Red didn't like him at all, and he said, "What do you think my chances of getting into the Hall of Fame are?" And I said, "Jacques, as long as Red's on the selection committee, your chances are zilch. You have no chance at all." And but no, Jacques was a good man. I felt a lot of respect for Jacques.
Yeah.
I've known maybe 12 to 15 people who were in the Senate, over the years.
Yeah.
And when Jacques, when they had the expenses scandal,
Yeah.
and two people that I knew, Mike Duffy and Pamela Wallen, who I worked with in Toronto, were both involved in that. And Jacques, to his credit, suggested that anybody that got caught up in this should be fired, should be thrown into the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
And that took a lot of guts to do that. And
Wow.
And it took a lot of it took a sense of honesty and integrity. And I was very impressed with that.
Pretty cool.
That's something you and Jacques have in common, Pat.
Yeah, you guys brought up the great Red Fisher on a couple of occasions. I got to tell you, it took a while for him to say hello to me. Like I said hello, Mr. Fisher, at that famous table that you guys were talking about. I said hello, Mr. Fisher, and I think I don't know if this was to the day, but I think 1 year went by, and pretty much on the 1 year anniversary that I was
weren't a rookie.
Yeah.
You weren't a rookie anymore.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. Pat, Stu talked about your love for tennis before watching and playing. You're going to have some more free time on your hands starting in about 5 weeks from now, but I know that your knees have been aching up over the years. Are they still good enough to play tennis or golf?
Oh, sure. They've both been replaced.
Ah, good. Fantastic. All right.
There's metal now. There's no pain in them at all.
Oh, that's good to hear. So you're going to be playing quite a bit of tennis, I would imagine then.
I'm hoping to.
And golf.
No,
Pat's not a golfer.
Not a golfer.
I'm not a golfer.
All right. So anything else other than tennis?
No,
your free time, Pat. I know you said you might get into teaching. I know you said there's a book or two you'd like to write, so we know you're going to play tennis as well. How about the comedy career? You started to stand up some years ago. Are you going to continue with that?
I'm still going to continue with that. I've found a niche right now. I'm involved with Joey Elias and these the Legion of Friends, and we've done 7 fundraisers for the Legion, Canadian Legion. We did one last weekend. We did one show in Pierrefonds on Friday night, and then another show at the Dollar Community Center on Saturday night. We raised $25,000.
Wow,
in 2 nights.
That's amazing.
So we'll continue doing that. As I tell the people, I said, it's an older crowd. Said, this is my kind of audience, older people who drink, and so I just enjoy doing that.
Well, Pat's not a golfer. One of the highlights of the Canadians golf tournament every year was Pat's golfing pants, which he would give John Daly a competition there. That was one of the highlights every year.
Are you talking about this? His golfing pants? Let's see if we can bring it up here. And Yellow and Sammy in Master Control. Let's see how alert they are. There we go. No, that's not the golfing pants. That's not the golfing pants either, with also the great Herb Zurkowski. It's quite a trio there. I think we got one in the golfing pants. Do we have one with the golfing pants? The
entire sports department there.
That's the full sports department as of now right there. When the Canes were in the playoffs a few years ago.
I think we had another picture with the golfing pants, and I think we had another picture with Pat with his computer or his typewriter. I don't know what it was. And Yellow and Sammy in Master Control. Do we have those 2 other pictures? There we go. Pat, hold on a second. Hold on to this one. Pat, when was this?
It's a long time ago.
Wow.
That's probably early 80s, I would think, Pat.
Yeah.
The computer and the Diet Coke bottle there in the background.
Yeah.
Now, this is where? This is in the newsroom? Is this the newsroom or?
It's a sports desk.
That might be in Toronto.
Oh, is that in Toronto? Yeah.
Yeah.
Really, eh? Wow.
I remember those computers.
Yeah.
Diet Coke, was that your beverage when on the job, Pat?
It's my caffeine of choice.
That's it, eh? All right, okay. All right. Do we have the one with the golf pants by chance, or we don't have the one with the golf pants? Not sure. They're probably looking for it. I think I saw one with the golf pants earlier today. Let me see if I have it here. Hold on a second. Maybe they have it. Hold on here. The golf pants. All right. Hold on a second. Here we go. The golf pants.
That's them.
There we go, huh?
Those are Madras that I bought in Algonquin, actually.
Wow, quite something. I was invited, I think, one year to play in the Montreal Canadiens golf tournament. Laval-sur-le-Lac. Pierre Boivin was the president at the time. And I'm not much of a golfer. And when it was a par 3, probably about 160 yards or whatever it was. And I took my putter and drove with my putter. He found it pretty funny because I was probably about 20 feet from the green driving with my putter. Mind you, I also broke my putter, but I never got invited to play in the Canadiens golf tournament again. So it was, I think it was my only time. So I think they were amused, but not overly amused. Pat, in ending, actually, why don't I give a quick shout out to Playground with over 600 machines, poker tournaments, playground casino games, daily promotions, unmatched customer service. Why go anywhere else? Located just over the Mercier Bridge, only minutes from downtown Montreal. Pat, maybe you and I will go together because I got some free time as well, and maybe we'll go play the slot machines one day. But in ending, Pat, any advice you have to young journalists or young aspiring journalists?
Well, I mean, just to be, try to be honest. Try to do the best job you can of telling a story, communicating with your audience. Aspiring journalists, I would probably tell them to have a backup plan. And I mean, it's sad to say that. I know that. I used to speak to a lot of high school career days and CJEP career days, and try to. I actually tried to steer people away from journalism schools. I taught journalism at one point, and I thought it was more important to get a broad general education, arts education, history, a little political science. Read and then work for a student newspaper. I thought that was the best thing to do. For a long time, I worked at the Toronto Star and at the Vancouver Sun. I was part of the group that would interview summer students for internships, and I would also subscribe to all the university papers across the country, because then I saw a copy that hadn't been edited. I saw raw copy, and I could get an idea of how much talent there was, how people could write without. A lot of times when you get into journalism schools, you have professors who are massaging, the finished product, that what you see. And I mean, I went back and did a master's in journalism when I had been in the business for 13 years. And it was interesting. I mean, Eric Duhatchik was one of my classmates, a guy named Earl Fowler who worked for us at the Gazette, and it was good to get back and see how young people thought, and just energized me, for that year. And but I just didn't think an awful lot of. I thought there was for the year that you put in school, I thought you could have taught people that in 4 or 5 months in an actual newsroom.
Yeah, I hear you.
So
yeah,
it's
Stu, I know how much you love this gentleman. Everyone does, and I really wanted to have Pat on the Sick podcast tonight. And Pat, I'm very happy that you accepted the invitation, so we can all tell you, and you can share your story, and we can all tell you how we feel about you. Stu, I really wanted you to be a part of it as well, and that's why I called you to come on, and I'm happy you came on. And
I appreciate that, Tony.
Are we going to have going away for this gentleman? Even though he's not going to be going away, he's going to be with us. We're going to have a celebration of his career.
We will definitely have that. We'll have some plans in the work once we find out exactly when Pat's last game is, and I'll definitely let you know, Tony.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Gentlemen, thanks for taking the time. Pat, on behalf of all Montrealers and all sports fans, thank you for the love in which you did your job. Thank you for your honesty, and thank you for being as good as you are, both at work and in life. Takes a special person to do what you did, Pat. You should be very proud. Thank you. Have a great night, gentlemen.
Thank
You
you.
too, Tony.
All right, there you have it. Stu Cowan and, of course, the great Pat Hickey. I'm Marinaro. If you like the podcast tonight, hit the like button, share it with your friends, tell them about it. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, comment SICK, S-I-C-K. If you're going to be listening on all social media apps, including Spotify, leave us a 5-star review. It's our way of feeling your love. The Sick Podcast will be back tomorrow night, same time, same place, at 10 p.m. Is it 10 p.m. yet? I'm Marinaro.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast with Tony Marinaro on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts. The Sick Podcast is brought to you by Energy Transportation Group, driven to be different, 8.6, intense by nature, and La Cage. If the last time you went to La Cage was when the Habs won the cup, it's time you went back to La Cage. The menu will surprise you.